You learned early that silence keeps you safe, that shrinking yourself makes the room quieter, makes them love you a little more, or at least hate you less. You don't remember choosing invisibility, but it grew over you like a second skin, smooth and suffocating. Now, as an adult, you still apologize for taking up space. When did being unseen start to feel like survival? It begins before memory, in the pauses between someone else's words. You reach out crying, babbling, needing, and the room stays still. The absence of response becomes its own language. The ignored child learns quickly. Attention is dangerous, need is shameful, emotion is a liability. So you stop reaching. You adapt. Each unanswered cry trains your nervous system to shrink, to anticipate rejection before it arrives. The silence becomes familiar, even comforting, because it's predictable. That's how neglect works. It doesn't hurt you by what it does, but by what it withholds. The quiet wraps around you, heavy and absolute. And when silence becomes your mother tongue, what part of you ever learns to speak again? You start to understand that love has conditions. Approval requires smallness. You learn to read micro-expressions, to sense moods before they're spoken. Every gesture becomes data for survival. You become hyper-attuned, scanning for danger in tone, in breath, in silence. It's not awareness, it's vigilance disguised as empathy. Adults call you sensitive, as if it were a compliment, but you know it's training. You disappear a little more each time someone says, "You're such a good kid." They mean obedient. They mean quiet. You learn to smile without showing need, to listen without existing. Invisibility isn't a defense anymore. It's your identity. How do you unlearn a language that once kept you alive? Your body never stopped speaking, even when you did. The tension in your shoulders, the shallow breath, the stomach that clenches before you even know, why, it's the residue of a childhood spent bracing. Neglect doesn't leave bruises. It writes itself into posture, heartbeat, digestion. The ignored child grows up with a nervous system that never truly lands. You mistake numbness for calm, exhaustion for peace. When someone finally looks at you, your body flinches, uncertain whether recognition means safety or threat. This is what happens when no one teaches you that your existence is allowed to take up space. If the body remembers everything you tried to forget, who do you become when it starts to speak again? You search for yourself in others' eyes, but find only their needs reflected back. As a child, you learned that identity was something assigned to you. Quiet, mature, independent. These were not compliments. They were containment. You became what others required, sculpted by their absence. When you looked in the mirror, there was no reflection, only a faint outline waiting for instruction. So you learned to mimic, to mirror moods, to perform connection rather than inhabit it. The ignored child becomes a shapeshifter, loved for adaptability, punished for authenticity. You learned to be who they needed, never who you were. If you were never truly seen, how could you ever be sure you exist? You mastered the art of self-erasure. You called it independence. You convinced yourself that not needing anyone made you strong, that solitude was choice rather than consequence. But beneath the pride, there's hunger, a quiet ache for care that you've trained yourself not to notice. You soothe others with ease, yet choke on your own longing. To need is to risk rejection. To depend is to reopen an old wound. So you stay self-contained, polished, efficient, a fortress disguised as a person. People admire your composure, never suspecting it's built from abandonment. You don't crumble. You disappear neatly when even your strength is just another form of fear. What part of you is truly free? You learn to play fine. You smile at the right times, laugh on cue, hold eye contact just long enough to appear human. The world rewards performance, it doesn't notice the cost. Inside, you're watching yourself from a distance, rehearsing each response before it's spoken. You study others to copy what connection should look like, but imitation never feels like belonging. You move through life like a ghost in daylight present, but not alive. The ignored child grows into an adult who can function flawlessly while feeling nothing at all. You fit in everywhere and belong nowhere. If everyone believes you're masked, does that make the emptiness underneath any less real? When emotion finally breaks through, it terrifies you. Anger feels dangerous. Sadness feels indulgent. Joy feels undeserved. You were trained to suppress before you could name what you felt. Every time you cried, someone looked away or worse, sighed. So your nervous system learned to lock emotion inside, turning it into tension, illness, insomnia. Now, when feelings surface, you instinctively silence them, mistaking expression for weakness. You apologize for crying. You laugh while describing pain. You censor yourself mid-sentence. The ignored child becomes the adult who betrays themselves gently. Repeatedly. What happens to a person who's punished every time they tell the truth of how they feel? You don't fall in love, you replicate attachment. You chase familiar patterns, mistaking anxiety for connection. When someone withholds, you feel alive. When they offer care, you recoil. Neglect wired your heart to confuse chaos with comfort. You think love is earned through endurance, that devotion means tolerating absence. So you attach to people who make you prove your worth, again and again, until exhaustion feels like intimacy. When they pull away, the old panic rises not because you miss them, but because you're reliving the moment you first disappeared. You call it chemistry. It's repetition. If love has always felt like waiting, how would you even recognize its arrival? You crave visibility, but dread exposure. To be seen means to be judged, misunderstood, or abandoned all over again. So you build intimacy only to sabotage it the moment it approaches depth. You retreat behind jokes, deflect with intellect, or drown the silence with endless words. Anything to keep your core unseen. Because somewhere deep down, you still believe that if someone truly looked at you, they would leave. Neglect taught you that your needs are too much and your truth unlovable. So you hide beautifully. You call it privacy. It's self-erasure disguised as control. What if the love you keep running from is the same one you've been starving for? Memories aren't comforting, they are conspirators. You recall moments of reaching out and receiving nothing, and your body remembers the hunger your mind tries to forget. Faces blur, voices echo, absence etches itself into every synapse. You carry invisible scars, abandoned on the playground, ignored at the dinner table, silenced when you spoke. These ghosts whisper that you were always unworthy, always too much or never enough. Time doesn't heal, it layers. You live with the same child inside, still shrinking, still apologizing for taking space, still learning that survival requires disappearance. If memory is a mirror, what reflection remains when it only shows neglect? Trust is a foreign language you never fully learned. Every promise broken, every glance withheld, every word ignored taught you that reliability is a myth. You want to believe, but your instincts brace for betrayal before it happens. Even when someone shows care, your mind anticipates abandonment, preemptively retreating to safety. Relationships become exercises in strategy, not connection. The ignored child grows into an adult who watches the world through a lens of suspicion, protecting themselves from hurt by expecting it. You love cautiously, never fully, because the risk feels as dangerous as the pain itself. If safety was never shown, how could you recognize it when it finally appears? It simmers beneath your calm exterior, barely visible but relentless. Years of being dismissed, overlooked, and minimized ferment into a subtle, constant anger. You've learned to swallow it, to mask it with smiles, productivity, or distraction. But it never disappears. It shapes every decision, every interaction, every thought. The ignored child becomes the adult whose rage is invisible even to themselves, spilling out in quiet resentments, passive aggression, or the obsessive perfectionism that demands recognition without asking for it. You are furious at a world that never saw you, yet incapable of directing it fully anywhere. If the fire inside you is unseen, does it burn less or simply more destructively? You seek emptiness as if it were familiar comfort. Loneliness is a companion you know intimately. Connection feels alien, even unsafe. You fill your life with distractions, work, screens, people who cannot see you, because being fully present would require risk. Neglect teaches the child that absence is normal, so the adult unconsciously repeats it, surrounding themselves with voids they can control. Every fleeting attention feels like an anomaly, every deep gaze a threat. You crave engagement, but you recoil when it arrives. The ignored child becomes addicted to the spaces where they cannot be touched, unseen, untouched, uninterrupted. If absence has always been home, how can presence ever feel real? You are not a single entity, but a collection of fragments, each shaped by survival. One part performs, one part hides, one part obsesses over acceptance, one part numbs. You never learn to integrate these pieces. They coexist in tension, whispering contradictions. The ignored child grows into an adult whose identity is elastic, pliable, and porous, always bending to expectations, always questioning their own reality. You ask yourself who you are, but the answer slips like water through your fingers, leaving only reflection and doubt. Every choice feels tentative, every desire suspect, every thought borrowed from memory or expectation. If the self is fractured by neglect, can it ever recognize its own truth? Somewhere inside, the child still waits, small and silent, wondering why no one turned to see them. They watch your adult life with cautious eyes, recognizing the patterns you cannot unlearn. Every compromise, every retreat, every subtle self-betrayal echoes their old survival strategies. You tell yourself you've grown, that the past is behind you, but the child whispers that nothing ever leaves you fully. Their needs, once ignored, now pulse quietly under every decision, every relationship, every thought. You exist in duality, the adult who performs competence, and the child who remembers abandonment. If the child inside never learned to be seen, who are you when no one else is watching? You stand in the ruins of a self constructed from absence. Every coping mechanism, every learned mask, every quiet survival strategy reveals itself as both shield and prison. The world believes you functional, even whole, but the architecture of neglect remains silent, omnipresent, unyielding. There is no reconciliation, no moment of catharsis, no hero's return. The ignored child is not behind you. They are inside you, shaping perception, dictating response, haunting every interaction. You may appear competent, even confident, but the core truth remains. You were never allowed to exist fully, and nothing, neither time, love, nor success erases that imprint. When the masks fall and the mirrors shatter, what remains is not comfort, not clarity, but the relentless echo of having always been unseen. This completes the full descent.